As you go forward into 2018, which is a presidential election year, how do you reassure the Mexican people and investors about the course of the Mexican economy?
Well, very simply, I mean, the president, when he gave me the honor of naming me finance minister, he gave me pretty clear instructions, and I can summarize them in one word: continuity. So we're going to continue with the prudent fiscal, financial, and monetary policies that Mexico has been following in the last few years, and I think that has served them well. So we will continue to have solid public finances. We had a primary surplus last year. We will have a primary surplus in 2018. We will continue to have prudent financial policies and conservative monetary policies.
Well, you have a primary surplus, as you mentioned, but you also had a contracting economy over the last couple of quarters, largely because of the earthquake. But doesn't that argue for spending more now? And traditionally, don't Mexican governments spend more going into an election year?
Well, to make it clear, we did have an earthquake, and but we also have a good policies for dealing with natural disasters. Since the earthquake in 1985, Mexico has been building what we call a civil protection network that is pretty good. Now, moving forward, the Ministry of Finance doesn't do electoral politics, and the laws are pretty clear. The budget decree has very specific outlines as to what can and cannot be done, and the electoral law is also very clear. So for us, it's very important to signal and to tell everyone that we will continue in our course with sound macro policies for the course of 2018, because those have shown that even in the face of uncertainty, like in 2017, where there was a lot of uncertainty surrounding Mexico, Mexico did relatively well. Mexico is growing. We would like it to grow faster, but we still expect it to grow 2.2, which is a reasonable number for this year, and we will continue to move forward in this direction.
Your predecessor, Jose Antonio Meade, suggested that Mexico might be able to start cutting interest rates by the end of the year, but Mexico expected to raise interest rates at its next meeting. And with the Fed raising rates and the U.S. cutting taxes, are you going to have to look at a central bank raising rates throughout 2018? And how does that affect your growth?
Well, as the central bank in Mexico, which is an autonomous entity, which is a good thing. It's very independent. It's a very solid institution. And they've been looking at the numbers very carefully. The issue here is that the inflation rate is a bit higher than what we would like, mainly because there were two relative price adjustments, one-time relative price adjustments, the price of gasoline and the exchange rate. Now, what I hope is that sooner rather than later, the inflation will converge back down to the central bank target of between 3% and 4%. And once this does, I think that will provide room, but we will have to see.
Well, do you ask the central bank, the new central bank head, Alejandro Díaz de León, he's new as well in the job, do you ask him to slow down, to be more careful in raising rates because it's an election year and because the economy is struggling right now?
Well, let's say we have a very open dialogue. In the United States, there were these famous breakfast meetings between the Fed and the Treasury. Alejandro Díaz de León is also a friend of mine, as was the previous Minister of Finance. So we have a very fluid dialogue, and we talk about the economy and what the best things and what the best measures for it are. And we will try to move forward in what we think it's the best course of action is for the economy. We have the same interests at heart. We have different point of views, admittedly. Their primary interest is inflation. Our primary interest is the health of the economy. But these two can move. There's a way to harmonize the view, and I'm sure we can move together in 2018 and forward.
The big issue hanging over the economy for 2018 is NAFTA. What's the current thinking in the Peña Nieto government about whether Donald Trump is going to withdraw?
Well, our central scenario is that negotiations will continue. And, it's reassuring that there's a method and there's a dialogue going on in this regard. This week, there is a technical round going on. In January, there will be a ministerial round going on. So the dialogue continues. I'm a firm believer in trade. trade is good for both parties, not just the one who's exporting or just the one who's exporting, but also vice versa. And this has been a very fruitful relationship between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And what I hope is that Minister Guajardo, the Minister of the Economy, will continue to lead, and I'm sure he will continue to lead these negotiations well, and these will arrive at a reasonable result and a good result for for all three of the countries and for North America.
Well, the peso has depreciated as the course of the negotiations has gone on. Do you think it is undervalued now, and if so, by how much?
Well, it's always hard, and I always try to, when I was in Pemex, which, by the way, the tower is right behind me, and I'm very happy about that, somebody told me not to talk about the price of oil, and I didn't. The exchange rate is, I also don't want to say whether it's undervalued or overvalued. The exchange rate is what it is, and what we have to do is take the necessary course of action for the best measures for the economy. And that includes, and I will go back, to sound fiscal, sound financial, and sound monetary policies. And that's what we will do, and the exchange rate will adjust to whatever the right level is. But I think this is important for us. Mexico for the longest time had a fixed exchange rate regime with not very good results. And since 1995, when the exchange rate has moved, it has served well as an adjustment mechanism for the Mexican economy, and we're fully committed to that.
One last question. Foreign Minister Videgaray said recently that you're preparing a plan to reassure investors and stabilize markets should a NAFTA withdrawal take place. What do you say to investors? What do you do? How do you keep the economy on an even keel?
Well, we're always preparing for these things. I think the best way to prepare is to have very sound macroeconomic policies, as we did 2017. We're almost finishing 2017, and it looks like a reasonable year for Mexico. But if we were to look back, it was a very difficult year, especially at the start of the year. We had a massive structural change for us in which we liberalized the price of gasoline. Then we had the transition, and all of the discussions on NAFTA came up. And then we had the natural disaster. So it's been a rough year for us. However, if we were to look back, we see that sound macro policies that were done by my predecessor and the predecessors before me served Mexico well. So we will continue to do that. Our stabilization funds are at a record high. The central bank reserves are at a record high. We just got the flexible credit line renewed by the IMF.